Burns. I lead the Health and Human Services. And there's Abby. I lead the Health and Human Services team at Amazon Web Services. That also came to include labor and training as more of a focus area during COVID. It was something we'd done a little bit of work before, but certainly spent a lot more time on during COVID. I was part of the team before this that stood up 18F, the United States Digital Service, working with Jen Palka and others in the day, right after during the healthcare.gov crisis to really think through how we prevented something like that from ever happening again, and have now brought those same experiences, both working in the public and the private sector, and been at AWS working to help agencies adopt tech as part of how they think about delivering health and social benefit programs now for the last 5 years. I have the really distinct pleasure today of introducing a couple of folks. Abby McQuaid, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training. And then Scott Jensen, who is currently the CEO of Research Improving People's Lives, and the former director of the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training. Abby, why don't you say something just to make sure we can actually hear you before?
Sure. Hopefully folks can hear me.
Yep. All
perfect.
Good. Great.
Awesome.
Hi, Abby.
Hey.
All right. So really what this is today, this is an inspiring story. I think there was a lot of dark stories in COVID, which is obviously still going, but if you go back 12, 14 months ago, we saw a massive spike in layoffs and unemployment, and then a consequent dramatic increase in need and need for things like unemployment insurance. And as that need scaled up, what we didn't see was the government systems, the government programs that run them scale up effectively to meet that need.
So maybe a bunch of existing issues I think everybody on the call probably already is very familiar with.
Reliance on legacy technologies, legacy approaches, just legacy thinking about how technology gets deployed and how it gets done. And really, cause some massive disruptions in people's ability to apply for and receive vital economic benefits in a timely manner. It really showed some of the limits of technology and the technology approaches in place now, right, for responding and scaling up to meet a really urgent demand. We saw a lot of policy innovation throughout COVID and designing of new programs, right, and really the existing technology in place really struggled to scale up, to adapt, right, to allow programs to actually get implemented quickly, or even to scale up and meet the demands, the increased demand in these existing programs. One of these states that just did not have these problems is Rhode Island. Truly a remarkable story. They have the same relative need and really the same, all the same challenges, but came at this in a totally different way. And one that I think that all of us who are part of this community who really care about how tech and government come together should really be inspired by. And it's the story of how, right, the two leaders on the phone really said, okay, the way we've done this in the past, the way that others are going about this, it's not going to work. It's not going to meet the moment. It's not going to let us respond to the crisis. And really chose to take, what proved to be the least risky option, but was to abandon the kind of status quo approach and to really do something completely different. So this is really Abby and Scott's story to share. And I'm going to have Abby introduce the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training and kind of set up the situation, 12, 14 months ago now. Abby?
It's hard to yeah, absolutely. It's hard to believe it's been that long. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. So the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training has a very simple mission. Our job is to help Rhode Islanders succeed in our state's economy. And this takes a variety of forms. We enforce labor laws, we work with the federal government and the general public in terms of providing them with information on the state of our economy and the state of our workforce. We partner with businesses to provide demand-driven workforce development solutions. We administer federal workforce development programs. And another part of our mission, and arguably during a pandemic, the most important part of our mission, is to take care of Rhode Island workers when they find themselves out of work through our Income Support Division and our state's unemployment insurance program. When the governor declared a state of emergency on March 9th of 2020, we, like many other states, were sort of caught a little flat-footed. You know, unemployment insurance programs rely on pretty old, pretty creaky tech. And our system was, I want to say, the oldest and the creakiest. It probably isn't, but it certainly felt that way at the time. We were running on an AS400 i5 series that was originally built in the late 80s and relies on COBOL, which barely anybody knows anymore. On March 9th, we started to see a spike in our unemployment insurance claims. Essentially, we saw the largest number of claims that had ever been received in a single week in one day towards the end of that week of March 9th. By the following week, when more parts of Rhode Island's economy shut down, we saw even greater than that. So in one day, we received 4 times the applications for unemployment insurance benefits, 4 times greater a number than we had ever received in a week prior to COVID. So, you know, one of my roles at DLT is to be senior advisor for finance, amazingly enough. And so part of that job was to make sure that that my director and that the governor of the state had a clear view into how our unemployment insurance trust fund was essentially, how healthy was it, and what projections could we essentially make around where that trust fund was potentially going to become insolvent. Because of the frankly insane numbers of applications that we were receiving, you know, some of my projections, one of them I named the Armageddon scenario. It was very, very ugly. But, you know, more important than that, I think, is that we realized that, and this is prior to the federal government passing the CARES Act, we realized that out of a workforce of 550,000 people, all of the projections were showing that upwards of 200,000 would be out of work throughout the course of the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. So it was just really a matter of timing in terms of, you know, where the insolvency was going to happen. And, you know, we had a number of problems with that high of a number of applications coming in, not the least of which was the AS400, you know, really couldn't handle it. And then on top of that, the federal government passed the CARES Act, which included a variety of new unemployment assistance programs to help folks in the economy who wouldn't otherwise be eligible for unemployment insurance benefits. And our system at the time had absolutely no way of processing claims associated with some of those new programs. So we found ourselves in mid to late March in a bit of a crisis period. And I don't think that's different from any other state. I do, though, think that the way Rhode Island chose to tackle those issues was very, very different. You know, just to kind of lay the groundwork, a decision was made by our director to invest in technology and to try to make technology work to make the entire unemployment insurance process a little bit more efficient and a lot more user-friendly, rather than just throwing bodies at the problem, which is something that a lot of states wound up doing, actually. I don't know if, if you want Scott to pick up at this point or.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I will, Casey, since there's a quote from me up there. So I guess I was the director Abby was talking about. I'm doing another job now, but during the pandemic, I was running this ship, and I mentioned ship because I have to put it this way because it's just really straightforward. During the pandemic, I watched the Poseidon again 3 times. And if you've ever seen that movie from the 1970s, this luxury boat turns upside down. That is exactly what happened to unemployment insurance programs during the pandemic. There were all of a sudden impossible problems to deal with. And, Abby had described the scale that we were dealing with. We had a very old system and still do in Rhode Island, and almost every state in the country does, but also dealing with scale that is impossible. The programs just weren't made to do that. So we had to do something different. Casey, you made it sound like what happened in Rhode Island, at least from a leadership perspective, was somehow innovative. And thank you for doing that. But really, there's no choice. This was definitely necessity is the mother of invention. So and I think the first challenge to think about in this context is on the slide, the Pandemic Unemployment and Assistance Program. We knew that Congress had passed the PUA, and we knew that there were going to be tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders who were going to need to sign up for this new benefit program. And we had really old, forget our mainframe computer system running UI. We had terrestrial servers that, would crash at, 3,000 and 4,000 people using them. We estimated that there'd be 40,000 people applying for PUA. And because PUA was telegraphed extensively in the press by Congress, which was rightfully needed to let folks know that there's help coming during the pandemic, we knew that everybody would come at one time. So we figured out a move that I think served us really well during the pandemic. We would take the unemployment insurance data that lived in the AS400 and we would put it onto the cloud. And then we would write applications that were cloud-based and would get the data in the right shape to be ingested back into the AS400. So we would get cloud scale, cloud scale abilities without having to change in the middle of a pandemic. So the PUA system we did launch first in the country. The organization Research Improving People's Lives, which is where I work now, we brought them in. We were doing research work with them, and we asked them, hey, you guys, can you build us an application on the cloud quickly? They said yes. We did in 10 days. What we also did was got a database from the taxation department in Rhode Island, and that's how we were able to compare the information folks were giving us with what their gross income showed. So we were able to actually do some pretty good verifications of people's information so that we'd be able to comply with regulations that we knew were coming down the line from USDOL. So Rhode Island, by doing it that way, was the first state to issue pandemic unemployment assistance payments in the country. And I want to stress before we go to the next slide why that was so important. This pandemic in unemployment insurance was like a big, gigantic relay race. If you were able to get the PUA going okay, then yes, you were done with that. And you can move to your next part of the race, which would be one problem after the next, after the next, after the next, from about March of last year, ongoing in many states. And, if there are folks listening to this who lived through that in unemployment insurance, it's really hard to describe the level of stress that we were all under. And that goes for every state, every IT team working with every state. It was tough. It's nice to think that Rhode Island did a great job, but we were C+. We weren't given great service. We were swimming as fast as we could and just barely staying above water. So this challenge, there was no way that anybody was going to get through it without serious scars. But I think in Rhode Island we did a pretty good job. Casey, maybe the next slide. So if PUA wasn't bad enough, just think 40,000 people, which is a giant number in Rhode Island, hitting our system at once. That was tough. The problem is that every Sunday, everybody on unemployment insurance has to do something called certify. And basically that is, hey, I'm still unemployed and I still need benefits. As Abby was describing, that number was going to go and grow exponentially every single day. And we estimated that at its height, we would have 250,000 people on unemployment insurance at the same time. The problem with that is that needs a system that can handle that kind of volume each on any given Sunday. So what we did was just what I described earlier. We took the UI data and put it onto the cloud. We built with Amazon Web Services, who, by the way, were with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It seems like I'm closer to some of those guys than I am with people I went to high school with, because I think I spent more time with them. We built a web application and a phone application that would allow us to gather data from Rhode Islanders, attach that data into the file that was on the cloud, and then ingest that data back into the old school AS400. So with being able to do that, kind of kept us afloat. If, again, that is the second sort of step in the relay race, and if we didn't make it through that PWA, now we had this hurdle to cross. And because of the solution that we developed with AWS and our teams, we were able to make it through this hurdle as well. And again, you can imagine what happens in a state if a system like this crashes. And what happens is the first thing in Rhode Island people do is they call the TV station and they call the newspapers, and enormous pressure gets put on all of the political actors in the state. And that's actually, to be perfectly frank, that's how it should be. I wasn't hired, and Gina Raimondo, who was governor at the time, was not elected to fail people when they needed help. So that political pressure that happens in the news media is appropriate, and the more it grows, the more you have to respond to that, as opposed to responding to other problems. And if you get behind in that cycle, it's devastating, and you can't. So if you can keep afloat on top of it and serve people, then you can make it to the next problem and the next problem and begin to get a handle on it. Being behind the 8 ball in a crisis like this, you can be buried and not get out of it. All right, so maybe the next slide, Casey, and then I'll turn it back over to you. But we do have in government a really, really important job to do. And, we take it for granted. We take it for granted what government all around us is doing all the time. And we focus on, elections and, whatever scandals are going on at the time. However, when there's a crisis, you really see how things are and what you're relying on. And, we had a real crisis in COVID. absolutely no doubt about it. It wasn't just UI, it was everywhere across government. And, we needed to innovate. Not, again, because we're just innately innovative people, but because we had a job to do. And if we didn't do something different, we were very simply going to fail. And, that is not acceptable. So we were able to put our heads together, do some different things, and keep going, keep driving forward. So Casey, take it away.
Yeah, just thanks, Scott, for that. I think there's two incredibly important points in there that'll live on long past COVID, and that I think I want to highlight as the things, some of the North Stars I think everybody who's comes to a Code for America Summit is and should be driving towards. The first is really just about scale. That when these programs nationally are not designed in a way that when the need is the greatest, that they can meet those expectations. And that is just frankly unacceptable. We need to build better, we need to build smarter, and we need to build more resilient systems that can scale up and scale down as necessary. And you saw Rhode Island, and the work Scott and Abby did, really put in place some new frameworks to do that in the short term. Probably better if you're not doing that in the crisis, right? And that's just how we build systems moving forward. But as Scott said, right, necessity breeded innovation and invention there. The second one, which is also incredibly important, just the lack of and/or the failure to automate processes very effectively meant that, right, in some places where call centers were actually just deluged, up to 40 or 50% of those calls were for things like PIN resets or very simple activities that nobody wants to interact with a human, frankly, to do. First, it's not a great experience for the person calling in. And second, it's a terrible experience for that eligibility worker on the phone who is highly trained and needs to do, he wants to handle very complex cases, not to do PIN resets. So we see this again and again. So kind of throughout programs. So the work Rhode Island did to say, hey, can we really start to automate and make the IVR process a digital experience? Can we make that a digital transaction in real time? Incredibly important. I think what comes next, though, is equally important. Those two they solve these two use cases, and then really start to ask the question: okay, what comes next? What are the next sets of things we should tackle, and how do we go about doing that? So this is about the point where Rhode Island starts to really engage with a program, the Cloud Innovation Program at AWS, which is our mechanism for really using the same set of tools and processes that Amazon uses for designing new products and services. We call this a working backwards process. It's it's a well-defined process for how we think about ensuring that we are doing things, building things that people want, that solve problems that people use. And frankly, I've been at AWS 5 years, and I was surprised some of my early conversation for, I'm going to do this cloud thing. But tell me about how Amazon built its culture of innovation, or how do you build products, and what can I learn from those? And those were from secretary level folks kind of all over the US, thinking about how they kind of rebuilt and transformed their organization to function more like a tech. So I really want to turn it over to Abby to discuss both her process and her engagement with this program, this working backwards process, and kind of how it's helped lead them and the incredibly smart policy and program folks to think about what they're going to do next in terms of transforming this program. Thanks.
So one thing I just kind of want to level set on is that we began the working backwards process almost immediately following our successes with the PUA application, where Amazon Solutions Architects assisted the Ripple team in bringing that online in 10 days, and then the IWR success, which also was a 10-day process. And those sprints were kind of hair-raising, but also were demonstrative of the fact that in a time of need, government should be able to remain nimble and to pivot and to, make sure that it is essentially in many ways contorting itself to do what it needs to do to help the citizens of the state. DLT has a statutory obligation to help Rhode Island workers who have, hit a point in their professional lives where they're either having, one of the worst days, if not the worst day, when they come into contact with us. For some of our claimants, it's literally the worst day of their life when they reach out to us. And obviously during a global pandemic, you find not only that folks are, having a bad day and are worried about how they're going to put food on the table, but they're also amazingly scared of basically the environment around them, and they don't know what to do. And in many cases, the only government interaction that some of these folks had was with DLT. And so what we decided to do, just a couple weeks after our success with the certification system, was to jump into a working backwards session, and to actually start to think about how do we really start to build an interface for Rhode Island workers that provides them with the information that they need, that enables them to basically interact with the department with ease, that saves our call center folks for those very difficult kind of thorny issues that require a human being's intervention. And basically we just thought to ourselves, how do we make this better for Rhode Island workers? How do we try to alleviate some of the pressure? How do we try to really march forward in a way that is meaningful and actually, provides the people that we're charged with assisting with the assistance that they need, and quite frankly, that they deserve. So that's why we jumped into a working backwards session in the midst of a pandemic. So, one of the things that we really thought about as part of that working backwards was, what are the pain points for our claimants? And actually, we refer to Rhode Island workers who are interacting with us through the unemployment system as customers. We do think of them as customers of government services. So when we were trying to get together, essentially all of our thoughts around how can we modernize this application process, this claims review process, the certification process, the benefits management process, we thought about the questions that folks really asked. What we were hearing the most from those individuals who were able to get through to our call center. The number one question that we still see, quite frankly, or hear, is, what's the status of my application? Now, we did, prior to the absolute worst period of the pandemic, have to bring down a status page where claimants could check essentially whether or not the department had actually received their application. I should take a step back and just mention that UI in Rhode Island, and pretty much in every state, is a black box. So most people, you become unemployed through no fault of your own, you reach out to the department, you go online, you figure out how to apply, you apply, and then you wait. And sometimes you wait and you wait and you wait. Sometimes you only wait a couple days, sometimes you wait a month. And during that period, you really don't get a sense of what's happening with your application. And during a period where, again, this is for some folks the worst point in time of their lives, to not have the information that they need in order to make plans, in order to figure out where their next meal is going to come from, how they're going to pay for medicine, how they're going to pay their rent. That is awful. It's awful that UI is a black box. So the fact that folks couldn't see the status of their application, and I should mention that the status page in and of itself was highly problematic in that it really didn't provide an actual status, and folks trying to check it actually wound up crashing our AS400 because it was a live connection into it. So we wound up pulling that down, and as part of the working backwards session, we started to think about how do we actually give claimants meaningful information about what the department is doing with their application. How do we provide them with information on how much they're going to receive on a weekly basis? How do we actually let them know how essentially what their bank of benefits is in the course of a given period of collecting unemployment? So we started to think about essentially the ways that companies, retail companies, interact with their customers. And our communications director at the time mentioned the Domino's pizza tracker, where you can, you place your order and you see that, oh, pizza's going into the oven. The pizza has come out of the oven. The pizza has been given to the driver. The driver is on their way. The driver is outside your door. Basically, each and every one of those steps allows folks to, if not necessarily know the inner workings of what's going on with their claim, they don't know what, they don't know what US DOL guidance a person is looking at when they're determining whether or not they can receive benefits. But at least they have that piece of information that something is moving. In many cases, that's all somebody needs to know, that we are actually working on it, that we are working in their best interest, and that we are trying to get them the benefits that they need and that they deserve. So the pizza tracker was born, basically, of that working backwards session. This is a new front end to our entire unemployment insurance system that will enable customers to interface with the department on a completely different scale. We worked for months gathering data, working with UX experts, working with AWS ProServe and solutions architects to really come up with the best front end that we could. Essentially, how do we provide our customers with the information that they need on their claim status, their benefit status? How do we let them tell us when something has changed, like their name or their address? How do we let them tell us when their bank account has changed, or when they want to change their withholding status? These are things that, honestly, people have to call our call center to get information on at this point. So what we wanted to do was to really figure out a way to take all of those asked questions, take all of the information that we, the department, felt we needed to convey to people, and figured out, a front end that leaves the AS400 the system of record, but enables customers to interact with the department and receive actually meaningful information on their benefits. Our customers, Rhode Island workers, they don't care what the system of record is. What they care about is that they know where their next meal is coming from. They care about whether or not they're going to get benefits. And so that's the whole intent of the pizza tracker.
Awesome, and thank you, Abby. Next couple of slides are really for both of you about where Rhode Island has been and where you're going from a kind of UI perspective, both from a, what's the technology behind it and how are you kind of enabling that? I want to put that in the context of two questions that I think that have come in on the questions. The first is like, are you planning to continue using this technology you created as part of the PUA response and just UI generally? And what kind of technical challenge are you anticipating with DOL moving forward? And the second is if you could address how you specifically have handled and thought about fraud, especially when asked the question around contrasting the highly visible story in California, then how Rhode Island were approached that same topic.
Oh, absolutely. So the AS400 was, it remains our system of record. Basically, what this slide shows you is the way that claimants were interacting with the AS400. If they were lucky enough to get through to our call center, they were getting information from our call center representatives who were looking at green screens and tabbing through green screens to get the information that the claimants needed. There was a separate web interface for application processing and for that status update that wasn't particularly meaningful. As I mentioned before, we had the PUA application on the AWS cloud, but it was still separate and distinct from anything else that was happening in the system. The certification system was separate and distinct. What this slide shows you is that, even though all of the information was retained by the AS400, you have disparate pieces of information getting to different places, essentially coming into the 400 through different avenues, and leaving the 400 through different and disparate avenues. That is not the most efficient way to run a railroad, and it's not the best way for your passengers, quite frankly. So, the goal of this whole modernization effort is to leave the AS400 for now as that system of record, but use the cloud to not only build on the scalability, of having, right, the cloud is somebody else's computer somewhere else, not just not having to invest in on-prem equipment that after the pandemic would essentially gather dust. But, how do we wanted to develop a forward-thinking approach that would, kind of trap the 400 in amber, as it were, for a little while, but use the strengths and the capabilities of the cloud to allow customers to get the information that they need in an integrated way, so that people could apply for their benefits, see what's happening with their application, refile if they need to. They can tell us that their address has changed, their name has changed. They can update their banking information, their withholding information. The idea is to provide a holistic front end that customers can interact with that is, sort of foolproof. And that's really what this after is showing, that, we're looking to build on what we've already developed in the cloud to facilitate all of the various sort of entry points that customers will interact with the department through. As far as fraud, this is an interesting one, because every state in the country was hit with unemployment insurance fraud. It was not localized to California. It wasn't a problem that only Washington State had, or Florida, or Rhode Island. Every state was hit with what we call imposter fraud. that's when an individual purchases other people's personal information, their including social security numbers and addresses, usually on the dark web, and then they essentially file unemployment insurance claims in a multitude of states, pretending to be that person. And the name the name on the application matches the social security number, and the address may be an address that the individual has in fact lived at, because the fraudster has purchased accurate information. But the department was sort of, all departments of labor across the country were sort of at a loss as to how to deal with this onslaught of organized crime. That's what it is. It's organized crime. And, once again, in the spring of last year, Rhode Island took a different approach to attempting to weed out those claims that were filed fraudulently, but provide the dolphins caught in the tuna net a way to escape that net. So we began working with an analytics firm to develop an AI ML algorithm where we provide them with a slew of information on a variety of activities that are taking place within our system, as well as claims information. And over the course of, well, now has it been a year, Scott? I feel like it's been a year.
More.
That over the course of that period of time, they've continued to refine that algorithm so that they're able to tell us, okay, this is the population of claims that we suspect are fraudulent. And so we, the department, take that information and we put a temporary stop on benefits being paid out to those claims. Well, we are always going to catch some dolphins in the tuna net. And so rather than forcing folks to try to get through, to call the call center, to prove that they are who they say they are, we worked with AWS and LexisNexis to develop an identity verification tool through actually our certification system, so that claimants who learned that a temporary stop was put on their claim as a result of, suspected fraud, if they were who they said they were, they could log into the certification system and get routed to an ID verification quiz. And then that information was batched back to the AS400, and the temporary stop is immediately lifted. So, one of the things that we didn't want to do was just put stops on claims and not give folks the ability to self-serve, to lift that stop themselves. And so, over a course of, I want to say about 4 or 5 weeks, we worked with AWS Solutions Architect and their ProServe team, and we were able to develop this sort of custom interface that, again, limited the amount of interaction that customers would need to have with the call center, because quite frankly, we were receiving, and we still do receive, an average of about 35,000 calls a day. There's no way that we could have enough staff to handle that number of calls. And even though those 35,000 calls are coming from like 5,000 unique individuals, and that information, by the way, we only have it because we went to the cloud with our certification system. There's, I don't care how many people we hire. There is absolutely no way we can handle 5,000 individual people's issues in a given day. So rather than having folks have to fight to find a place in line in the queue and try to get through to the call center, we wanted to make sure that people were able to basically take care of themselves if they were one of those dolphins.
Yeah, one thing to that, it's bad customer service to capture dolphins like Abby's describing, but we also were sued by the ACLU because it turns out that when you deny somebody benefits without due process, this is not a good thing. So to add to the pressure, you kind of get in it from all angles, but that is how Rhode Island is able to avoid that lawsuit too.
Thanks. We have about 12 minutes left, and I want to give you, especially Scott, a little time to speak to the kind of completeness of vision here. I mean, it's one thing to, and it's certainly the first priority and essential to create these great customer experiences where we actually get people the benefits they need when they need them, right? But you guys have also put in place, really tried to connect and take a broader, more person-centric view to, thinking about what the complete experience is for someone experiencing unemployment and what it means to kind of re-enter the workforce. And Scott, that's a mission you've picked up now at Ripple as well. So if you want to spend a few minutes telling us about where you think UI and employment and goes moving forward.
Sure. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Here's the thing. This whole endeavor is not done yet. For all of the people who lost their jobs during the pandemic, a lot of them are not going back to those old jobs. It's unfortunately all of the folks that we so often treat poorly in the labor market in this country anyway. Primarily people of color, women more than men, people with less education than have more. So we've wiped out, COVID has wiped out some pretty big parts of the economy. It's gonna take a while for hospitality to come back. It is gonna take a while for retail to come back, and I'm not sure that it ever will. So while everybody's ready to come out of the pandemic, while the economy is poised to go, we have a big job of taking people on unemployment insurance and getting them connected into the economy. And that connection's got to be done at the same kind of scale we've been talking about here, which is not possible to handle given the systems that are in place in government to deal with them. Primarily, I'm talking about the one-stop systems funded by USDOL. It's just, and those are great places, the one-stop centers around the country, but we can't, they just can't handle it. So what Ripple has been doing is kind of this that Abby was just talking about with unemployment insurance. We are taking data that were put on the cloud from government partners, and using that data to help people find new jobs. So this is what we call DOORS, but it starts with we take a research data lake and deploy it to the cloud. That allows a state to de-identify its wage records, and for a group like Ripple or universities or economists elsewhere to kind of mine that data, and this is number 2 in this virtuous cycle diagram, to mine that data and try to look at, for maybe the last 10 years, when people have been switching careers from one industry to another, what kind of person does well when they move from industry X to industry Y? And then we also take a look at, well, what kind of job training programs, given what we know about the labor market, which of those programs have the best return on investment for job seekers? And now, in the fourth part of this little this slide, when Scott Jensen, unemployed person, shows up to what in Rhode Island is called the Career Compass, and its app Skipper to help you look for a job. Now I come to that with my own profile, and I'm getting the benefit of all of that data mining that was happening before. So the Career Compass application that Ripple built will help surface potential career switches for me that I can explore myself. And when I'm looking at training programs, will give me the kind that I need to make a good judgment about what return on investment's going to be. And, you know, as I'm using this application, I'm able to provide feedback, which, you know, hey, you know, thanks for those job selections, but they really weren't what I was looking for. And that's number 5, and it will move us, you know, help Ripple fix the, you know, the AI and adjust it and have it learn more about how to be more successful down the line. So this tool is available at the kind of scale that talking to a person in the one-stop isn't. Rhode Island is the beta first test case site for this application. Again, it's called Career Compass. It's online right now. Research improving people's lives are working with a lot of other states. Right now, for example, in New Jersey, we're going to be integrating with some great work that those guys are doing. They're leaders in the tech space, and you know, they're actually looking for help. So if anybody wants a good job, the New Jersey Innovation Office is a great place to look. But you know, it's again the same thing. We can't, you know, with all of the people that we need to help get into the labor market, we just can't kind of hold our nose, do it the old way, have the system fail, and wait until we stop getting yelled at by the public. That's just not going to do it. We need to solve some of these problems, because if we don't rebound from COVID, you know, our economy is going to be much weaker, and we're going to not be able to compete globally as we want. And getting the right people with the right training to right opportunities in the economy that are growing, it's really an imperative. So excited to be doing that around the country, Casey.
Thanks.
And you know, I think that you know, the thing is, it can be done. It can be done. It's hard and it's fun, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's just probably a few thoughts we want to leave people with. And I think to echo Scott's point, one of them it can be done. I think these are very tailored, I think, to the civic tech community. And I think the you know, the folks we're working around who work in government and tech. But I think it's important to remember that we had a big crisis in 2008 too, and we've had them with healthcare.gov. And we really need to make the lessons stick this time. And some of them are really going to be around, right? What is the speed at which government can work, and what are the expectations for speed? Right? We just have to acknowledge and have to show again and again that when using the right approaches, government can work at phenomenal speed and deliver high quality and amazing products and services. Kind of always has. We've forgotten that. It used to be part of the DNA. The second, and I can't just emphasize this enough, like especially for all of us and what we're doing, is the status quo is the riskiest path forward. A literal quote I heard from a state level CIO was, "I am looking for a proven solution for handling my PUA program." I'm like, this requirement, this program came into being a week ago, right? The program they're running has not been very successful. It struggled to pay claims and had some bad issues with security, right? So taking a unconventional approach, one driven by necessity, and frankly, one that no longer should be controversial, right? Which is to decompose problems, move with speed, adopt user-centered design, right? It just shouldn't be controversial anymore. We have to make this stick. This is less about the technology and really more about the process and the philosophy that we take about it. The third, moving forward, I've emphasized a couple of times around resiliency, but I think it's just incredibly important that we acknowledge the importance of moving to digital services as part of a resiliency strategy. We cannot scale up our government in the times of need if our technology doesn't scale up to support the vital programs and services that they deliver. And I think we've been stuck in this awful conversation around automation and digitization in these programs. And I think we need to just agree that we do not have enough of the incredibly valuable caseworkers in these programs. We're never going to have enough. We need to give them superpowers with technology and let them focus on that highly differentiated work they do that can't be done by a machine. And we need to get off of their plate all the work that can be done by machine. And we'll find in that situation, like we have in Rhode Island, there's still too much work, all right? There's a lot to do. But we really need to build services that are effective, and they're effective not just for the person applying, but for the person administering the programs as well. Cannot forget here. So Abby and Scott, we have a minute left. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I just want to say that, from the perspective of somebody who is sort of dedicated themselves to trying to help, right? Nobody goes into civil service because they want to get rich. You go in because you actually want to help, your fellow people. The only way to do that moving forward is to use digital services. And, it's not the future, it's right now. And government has to acknowledge that.
Well said, Abby. All right, I think that is an excellent note to wrap up on. Thank you, everybody. Feel free to reach out to any of us after for additional questions. Abby and Scott, thank you so much. And have a great conference, everybody.